Hello, Rick. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation for this interview and to be on our show, Woodiments. It's a great honor. For those that don't know Rick Dior, Rick is a percussionist, drummer, and professor of percussion at the University of North Carolina. He's the author of instructional books such as Advanced Coordination for Drum Set and Hand Percussion and Broad Strokes. Please check his work at his website, which is acousticband.com, correct?
Yeah.
And subscribe to his channel at YouTube. His instructional videos are exceptional. Rick has performed several clinics for past chapters in Carolina and currently holds endorsements with Vic Firth drumsticks, Mike Balter mallets, Paiste cymbals, and Doc Sweeney drums. So, Rick, tell us about your early years. You studied with giants like Fred Hinder, Bob Midger, and Joe Morello. How did they affect you as a drummer and as a person?
Well, before I started with them, I started playing when I was about 9 years old.
9 years, huh?
Studying, yeah, and with a guy named Jack Winters. He was a professional drummer, not well known, but a great musician. And I started studying with him. And I studied with him through elementary school and junior high school. And then in high school, I started playing professionally. When I was about 15, I was playing at a club in New Jersey. That's, for those of your listeners who aren't aware of all the geography in the States, it's very close to New York.
Okay.
Right outside of New York, maybe 20 minutes. And I was playing on this in this club that was kind of on the water, like a boat, like a giant riverboat. And it was a jazz club. And when I was playing with a big band, I started playing with a professional big band when I was 14. And Joe Morello happened to be a member of the club.
Okay.
And so at that time, I was obviously familiar with who he was, but I'd never met him. And, Joe's blind, or he was blind. He passed away. And somebody introduced me to him, and he came and sat in, and we kind of started a friendship. He would come every week and just hang out at the club, And at this time, he was busy still playing in New York and teaching a lot in New Jersey. And so I just started studying with him at that time, and I was a teenager, still in high school. And then I went to college, and that's where I studied with Fred Hanger and Bob Mintzer and Walter Rosenberger from the New York Philharmonic and several other really great teachers. I was very lucky.
You were.
Yeah, it was a good time to be in New York. It's where I'm from, and all these great players were there. And so, and I studied with Joe probably on and off about maybe 8 years until I was out of college. And
it's a lot of time, yeah.
Yeah, it's not every week now. It's very informal. Like, I would be his last student. Joe always ran on what we called Morello time. He'd always be an hour or two behind, late, And so I always made sure I was the last one. And he taught in New Jersey, so I was coming from New York. So I'd have to drive there once I was going to school in New York. I would drive there, and
what was
and
the
then
distance?
we would have. What's that?
The distance between you drove.
Yeah, I would drive, or it was West Orange, New Jersey, Glenn Weber Studios. Is from New York is probably about 30 minutes, depending on traffic.
Okay.
And or I take the train. There was New Jersey Transit that went there from Penn Station. But anyway, I was always the last student, and I always knew he would be late. And then after, we would just kind of hang out and play a while, and then we'd go out and hang out at a bar he liked to go to with his dogs, he had these great. He always had these great dogs, to assist him because he was blind. It would be me, him, and the dog. And that was really, you asked me how it affected me. That affected me more than anything because I got to really spend a lot of quality time with him, and he would tell me all kinds of great stories. And, when he was with Brubeck and all the drummers he hung out with, and he knew everybody, and everybody knew Joe. Everybody loved Joe. And so I met a lot of great drummers through him.
Okay.
So that was a really good thing. And my first teacher, Jack Winters, was also great. I used to go with him, you know, when I was 10 years old, 11 years old on gigs and watch him play, sit right behind him. And then as far as Hinger goes, he was a different kind of teacher. He was at Manhattan School of Music, where I went to school. He was the main guy there. He was the head of the department. And so I had another teacher, a timpani teacher, who took me to take a lesson with him when I was in high school. And I was actually going to go to another college. I had been doing auditions all around the country, and I got pretty good money from some of these colleges to go. And so I just went to take a lesson with him because he was legendary, and I wasn't planning on staying in New York. I really wanted to get out of there, actually. So, but anyway, I went to his house in Leonia, New Jersey, took a lesson. And it's interesting, you know, your show's about rudiments. I played all this stuff for him. I played all this marimba, timpani stuff. And the last thing I played for him was a Will Poppin solo, Heating the Rudiments, it's called. And, you know, he didn't say anything the whole audition. He was just kind of stone-faced.
Silent.
Silent.
Like
he's German, you know, so,
okay.
you know, he didn't show a lot of emotion. I mean, I'm not saying anything. But he was like old school, very, you know, strict and not, you know, just nothing.
Quite
no
stressful,
laughing, no smiling, nothing. What's that?
Quite stressful, I'm thinking.
Yeah,
right?
you know, at that point I wasn't worried about it because, again, I was already thinking about going to these other schools that I had gotten into. And I had gotten, you know, we grew up without hardly any money. Not a lot, you know, so it wasn't like I was going to be able to go to college unless I got a big scholarship. So anyway, everything was fine. And then I played that rudimental solo, and everything changed. He lit up, and he was really excited. And I was shocked because that's something I've been doing since I was a little kid. And I wasn't even going to play anything. I played a classical snare drum solo for him. I think it was probably a Anthony Cerrone solo or something like that. And I just said, he said to me, "Do you got anything else?" I said, "Well, I got a rudimental solo." He goes, "Yeah, go play that." And I played it, and he was like, "Wow." He said he hadn't heard anybody play like that since Charlie Owens, who was a guy from Philadelphia Orchestra who he played with, I guess. And so after that, everything changed. He was, you know, he was really accepting, and he offered a lot of money for me to go there, almost free. And so I ended up going to Manhattan because of that one little thing, the one little rudimental thing.
All right.
It's pretty strange. Yeah. So, and then Mintzer, I had the least amount of contact with him because back then at Manhattan School of Music, there were two separate programs. There still are, jazz and classical. And I was in the classical program, but they were starting in the jazz program at that point. And there weren't any other drummers that first year. The next year, John Riley came, Richie DeRosa. These are two of the most amazing musicians you'll ever hear. Especially Richie DeRosa is incredible. I don't know if you know who he is. He's the WDR big band director now. He's one of the greatest living jazz arrangers and a great drummer. Played with Jerry Mulligan. I took some lessons with him as well. Clem DeRosa's son. Anyway, they came the next year. So I was 17 years old, and I walked into this situation where I was in the jazz program automatically because there were no other drummers. And then I was also in the classical program. And then Mintzer, they brought him on to teach arranging and composing. And I ended up with him and a great bass player, a legendary bass player, Todd Kuhlman, who played with so many unbelievable, Slide Hampton, he was his music director. I mean, you know, he's just incredible. And these guys, you got to remember, like they were in their, I think at the time, John was probably almost 30 years old, as was Todd. And they were going there to get their masters so they could teach at, you know, schools like Rutgers or William Patterson or other schools, because you had to have a master's to teach there. And so, yeah, I ended up, you know, with these guys. And Minster had just gotten off the Buddy Rich big band.
So you had a very interesting educational experience, as
yeah,
far
I
as
was
I
in the
can
right
understand.
place at the right time. You know,
Yeah.
it's one of those lucky kind of things. And I really didn't know what was, I mean, now looking back, it was amazing. But at that time, it was like, oh, okay. You know, and those, you know, I mean, at the time, those guys, I mean, Bob Minster wasn't well known, and neither was John or Richie. None of those guys were well known. I mean, you know, I think John Riley had just come off playing with the Woody Herman band, and he was trying to teach more. And now he teaches at Manhattan. But anyway, that next year, John and Richie did the big band that I had been doing. And I also played some, which was great because I got to sit behind them, and they had a lot more experience, obviously, and really learn. And then Peter Erskine was also playing with Bob Minster's band. We had a room called 610, which was the room at the top of Manhattan School of Music, giant room, like half the size of a gymnasium. And they would rehearse there with the Brecker brothers, and Tom Barney played bass. Frankie Malabe played conga. I learned a lot from him. Peter Erskine, and just Lou Marini, you know, the sax player. Just these, David Sanborn played with that band. I mean, just who's who of New York players. And I would just sit there right in back of Peter and just watch them. I didn't play with them, but just because I was in that thing, they just let me hang around. And that was the first Bob Minster big band. That's even before they recorded. So this is back in the early 80s, 1980s. And of course, that big band became one of the greatest modern big bands, you know, before Maria Schneider and all these other bands. It was Bob Minster's band that had a recording contract with DMP, which was a really good jazz label back then. One of the first compact disc digital jazz labels. So anyway, I was like a fly on the wall a lot of times, and I just absorbed everything.
Yeah.
So, and again, playing with Minster in that little trio with Todd and me for a year, you know, it was like a jazz combo. And between him and this other guy, Jimmy Knepper, who played with Mingus, I was also in his jazz classes. Both of those guys really changed the way that I looked at playing jazz. And Bob Minster's actually a pretty decent drummer. A lot of people don't know, just like Chick Corea is. And so he would play sometimes, and I would play vibes. And then, you know, we would bring in tunes. Like I know with Jimmy Knepper, I brought in a lot of my music that I started writing, and even with Bob, and they would make suggestions, and I learned a lot like that. And then I was in classes with Richie DeRosa, and also, you know, jazz arranging, and I think improvisation, and I learned a ton from that. So all that helped my writing immensely. And I do a lot of composing for Taxbase. And that's a big part of my life. So that's how all those guys shaped my, you know, my whole process.
Okay. So you have performed in the past with James Taylor, Aretha Franklin, Ray Charles, Bob McFerrin, and many more. So what is it like to sit in the drummer's percussion chair for these great musicians?
Well, yeah, a lot of times I was playing percussion because, you know, they would bring their own drummer. Like with Aretha, it was Bernard Purdy, normally would travel with her. I played several times with her. In the early days, it was Bernard. And then it was later on, the last time I played with her was the night that Whitney Houston passed away.
Okay.
That was very emotional. And that was a new rhythm section that she had brought with her. Not Bernard or any of those guys. But no, Aretha was amazing because I grew up listening to her. I remember I was playing congas and hand drums and vibes and timpani and, you know, all the percussion stuff. And, you know, I was right next to Bernard, and I knew Bernard from, I used to play jazz festivals, and he would, at the Columbia Jazz Festival, he would be there. So we had met before, but so I wasn't as excited about that. But as soon as Aretha's voice came over the monitor, my whole body just broke out in like
amazing experience.
I almost like it was like unbelievable how I felt just hearing that voice that I've listened to so long just come right through the monitor, and I think she opened with Respect, the first gig. But it was just, I could barely play. And then I got to play with her a bunch more times because every time she was in this part of the country, the contractor would call me.
Mm-hmm.
And then with Ray, I played drums with him once, but normally it was like Steve Turry's brother. I can't remember his name. And I think Vince Vanacore, who was his music director for a little while, I played a couple times with him, who's really a great guy. I've played a bunch with him with different gigs. And then later on, it was several times over many years. And the rest of the time it was percussion. And Ray always liked the percussion right behind him. Like he liked to hear that.
Okay.
And I would never want to play with Ray as his regular drummer because he was really hard on drum. And his tempos were so slow, you could like drive a truck through the rest. When you did Georgia, it was like Georgia, you know. And of course, famous stuff with him getting on Ed Shaughnessy. And I know Ed. We've done some recording together, and I've hung out with him. And Ed says that, I guess he's passed now, but that was like the worst kind of moment in his career when Ray started yelling at him on the Tonight Show about drummer, you're rushing, you know.
This was live.
I was live, yeah.
Oh.
Back then it was live, and Ray, between singing, he was like, drummer, you're rushing. So poor Ed, who's the nicest guy you ever want to meet.
Okay.
Him and Louis Belson were just the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. And and that was Ray, because he would just get angry. And same thing, Lionel Hampton, I played some drums with him in New York, and he would just be smiling and then turn around and curse the band out. and he couldn't hear. At that point, he was pretty old, and he just would be like yelling to play louder and louder. And by the end of the gig, my hands were literally bleeding, like I had torn, because I was playing backbeats all night because he couldn't hear, because he was pretty far from. And yeah, he would be smiling like he didn't. He'd turn around, just scream at the back, and then turn back around to be smiling. It was the greatest thing you ever saw. I mean, not for us, and I didn't play with him too much. I would sub. I wasn't his regular drummer, but I subbed him a few times, and that was fun. I wouldn't want to play with him on a regular basis either. And James Taylor, who's probably one of the nicest people I've ever met, I played with him a few times with symphony orchestras. He did some symphony orchestra shows. And at that point, unfortunately, well, this is sad, but, Carlos Vega was his drummer, and Jimmy Johnson was the bass player. I think Don Grolnick or Warren Bernhardt were playing piano. All those guys, except for Jimmy Johnson, have passed. And, Carlos Vega, was tragic what happened with him right after. So that was great because I grew up loving the playing of Carlos Vega, and to sit right next to him was thrilling. So that's the best thing about playing with these guys. A lot of times it's just being in their presence and kind of absorbing their energy, and it changes the way you play. And like that one night or those 4 or 5 or whatever gigs just changed the whole way you feel about playing and how you go up another level,
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, and I we could sit here all day and I could tell you stories, but we don't have time for that. But no, I and Bobby McFerrin, he was the conductor for our orchestra for a whole season, which was amazing. I remember I did Porgy and Bess with him, the opera, and I played all the xylophone because I was playing principal percussion that year, and he took it so fast I could barely. I mean, that lick, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it goes like this. That's the lick, right? So it's an orchestral, famous xylophone lick. He would take it, and he would be up there smiling, laughing. He's an incredible musician, just incredible. And he didn't do any of his act. He would talk to the audience like a real conductor. I think he was trying to break into conducting. And then I never saw him again after that season. So, but he was great. And there's so many guys that I've been lucky to play with, and you know, that's the benefit about, you know, playing a lot of different percussion instruments, is that you do more gigs in, like, a lot of times these acts, like I play with BB and CC Winans, who are one of my favorite contemporary gospel acts. I just love them. And I got to play with both of them because they were traveling. I got to play drum set recently with BB Winans, and CC I played percussion with because she was traveling with her band. So if you play percussion, you get to play with a lot more people, because most of these groups have steady drummers for years and years. You understand? So that's all your listeners out there. That's one of the benefits. If you play percussion too, you'll get to play a lot more great gigs than if you just play drums.
All right.
Yeah.
So, Rick, you are a professor of percussion at the University of North Carolina, and you maintain an active private teaching studio. Which part of the educational process you find most appealing as a percussion professor, and what are the biggest challenges you are facing?
Okay, well, there's really no challenges. I mean, I love all my students. They're all great, and they're all good at certain things, and other things not so good, you know. And my goal, by the time I get them out of there in 4 years, is to make them great musicians. So we do, you know, snare drum and timpani and marimba and lots of drum set and hand drums and jazz vibes, and we do a whole bunch of things. And I do different things, like I have music education majors and performance majors who are gonna, you know, just try to perform for a living. And then I have double majors, so I have all kinds of different majors. So the challenges are just, first of all, correcting technical mistakes that they picked up in high school, and you know, which can be that can be a challenge, because a lot of them play really stiff and tight, and my challenge is to loosen them up. A lot of them play with marching band, and then they play really tight like this. And the challenge is to get them, you know, to really, you know, instead of doing this with their, you know, with their arms, just to use their, you know, their fingers and their hands, and, you know, doing all that. So that's that. If you want to talk about challenges, that's the biggest challenge, is fixing technique. Yeah.
All right. So let's continue with a basic question. What are the rudiments, and what is rudimental drumming? How rudiments relate to modern drumming, and do drummers need to study them in depth?
Well, the answer to your last question is absolutely. That's the basis for everything. If you go back a ways, like when I was a kid learning up north, New York, New Jersey, and all that, all the teachers up there were really good, and they all had good chops. You know, recently, in the past maybe 20 years, I think that the level of teaching has gone down a lot, because teachers are no longer teaching technique. They're just teaching drum set right away, and they're not working on their students' fingers and wrist techniques and teaching any rudiments, and it's an epidemic. And I see that in my college students who come in to audition, and then I can't let them into the college because they have no technique. Or if I do let them in, I have to spend a year fixing the bad things. So learning rudiments at a young age and learning how to manipulate your hands and use your fingers and your wrists is vital to having any kind of playing ability. And as you know, think about rudiments as if you play the flute or the trumpet or the violin, all those instruments you can't just pick up and start making music on. You can't. Nothing will come out. But anybody could pick up a pair of drumsticks and do that. That's our curse.
Our curse, huh?
Because anybody can kind of do it. But to be a virtuoso on the instrument is harder than any of those other instruments, because there's more coordination involved. There's more things involved that we have to do. There's more instruments involved. But like I said, almost anybody can sit down and play basic drums. So you have a plethora of musicians, well, not really musicians, I call them drum owners, who basically own drums, but they don't learn how to play them, because they think that learning any kind of, you know, technique or rudiment will mess up their playing or something like that. And that is the most ridiculous thing that you'll ever hear, because that's the basis. Like flute players, you know, my wife's a flautist. She plays professionally. She has to learn embouchure and how to breath control and scales, fingerings. There's drummers who never do any of that.
Yeah, they just sit on the drum set.
Yeah, they just pick up a pair of drumsticks their whole life, and that's then, you know, and like again, and there's millions and millions and millions of drummers out there. And maybe out of all those, 1% of them can actually really play the instrument. So that's why it's vital to learn rudiments and stickings and stick control at a young age, right when you start the first thing. So, yeah.
So if someone would like to dedicate himself in studying and mastering rudimental drumming, what do you think are the basic steps he should follow?
Well, the first thing is get with a good teacher. Number one, who does what you want to do. So someone who's got good technique. So there's good teachers everywhere. There's great players. You know, the funny thing is there's never been more great players, but there's never been more terrible players because there's so many drummers, right? And just like guitar players, and, you know, so the goal is to find a good teacher who can guide you into playing well. Because if you learn wrong, first, you're pretty much doomed. You know, if you play 5-6 years the wrong way, it's going to take a while to fix that.
Yeah.
When you start teaching rudiments, the first thing to do is teach a student coordination and timing. So you can use a book like Stick Control for that. That's been used forever, just for timing and stickings and holding the sticks and, you know, playing in time. The next book you might want to look at would be a book called Finger and Wrist Control by Charles Wilcoxon, which has studies in there for using your fingers. And then you want to start getting into books that just deal with the rudiments. So you can look at Nard. I have a book that a lot of people use. It's a 3 Camps book, which are just, they're all up on YouTube, but all they are is variations on the 3 Camps using all the rudiments. So I do a lot of that with young students and even college kids who need work on their hands to make sure they have all their stickings. And it's very redundant. So it's, you know, you want repetition is what you want. You don't want to just dive in and try to start playing rudimental etudes. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So you can start with real simple stuff. You can even go back to Haskell Haar and, you know, William Ludwig and their books, you know, from the 1930s or whenever that was, and work on that. But Nard is a good place to start. Then maybe the All-American Drummer by Wilcoxon. Then the Pratt solos. This is the order I do them in.
Okay.
The first Pratt book, which is the 14 modern contest solos. And then the second Pratt book, which is called the New Pratt book. And then the other Wilcoxon book, which is the
swing solos.
The swing solos. I've recorded all those. They're all on YouTube. But there's such a vital part of vocabulary. That's what rudiments are. They're your vocabulary as a drummer. So that's the order I do things in. And then for more technique, if you're a drum set player, excuse me, you want to do books like Master Studies, Joe Morello, maybe Accents and Rebounds by Stone. There's so many other technique books. And there's a lot of really advanced rudimental books. So, I mean, my book, Broad Strokes, is pretty advanced. There's lots and lots of others. Tompkins books, the French-American books are fantastic. These are really, really difficult books. And you have to have a lot of chops and reading ability to attempt them. So start really simple and learn all the rudiments first. Like, think of it like writing. Each rudiment is like a word. And then you start putting them into sentences with combinations of rudiments. Like the beginning of the Rudimental Swing Solo book has a whole bunch of exercises. So those are your sentences. And then the etudes are your paragraphs. And then finally, you can just sight read anything rudimental because you learn the language. So it's like learning a language. And that's the order I do things in, though. It's important to do it like that.
Great. Rick, I really admire the relaxed way you play. It's amazing. some say that some things can be played better and sound and groove better with a harder, more powered and tighter approach. Do you agree?
With a harder approach?
Harder, yeah. Some say that if you play more power, then the groove is better. Do you agree?
No, that's funny. No, I don't agree. That's ridiculous. And also, you're not gonna, I mean, I'm getting on in years, you know. You know, I'm pretty old, probably old enough to be your dad. And so easily. And so I feel great. My hands have never been better. If you play hard and tight, your career is going to be over by the time you're 50. I guarantee you that.
Yeah.
And I know this because I teach a lot of students who come here from Nashville and Florida and obviously this area, North Carolina, all over the Carolinas, and they're a mess. I mean, they have tendonitis, they have carpal tunnel syndrome, they have everything you could imagine because they play like this. And remember, Alexander, you know, as human beings, we're tool users, right? Instinct tells us, grab a stick like this, hit, eat, all right? Or build something. We're not programmed to do that or this.
Yeah.
Okay, those are things that are inherent to good drumming, but nothing else in life. So if you're not trained, you're going to always go back to that way of hammering things like this, using your arms, because that's our instinct as humans to do that. So no one picks up a hammer and does that.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. All right. So nothing's going to happen, right? So it's all about this. So I would make the argument that naturally we want to play like that, but playing tight and all that, how can you play any kind of advanced kind of drumming? If you want to play fast jazz, bebop, you can't do that when you're tight. If you want to play any kind of Latin music, forget it. All right. If you want to play funk, that's going to be hard because you can't ghost anything. So the only thing that would work for if you're playing in a punk band. Now, I've played in a punk rock band when I lived in New York at CBGB's. I used to play there once a week. And, you know, this is when I was 18, 19 years old. And, you know, I probably weighed 90 pounds and I played all night super fast. And, you know, the B-52s would be playing there and everybody else. And, you know, for that kind of music, yeah, you got to play with your arms and because it's so fast and loud. But for most any other kind of music, you've got to be relaxed. And to have a long career, especially, you got to be relaxed because these parts wear out. I mean, they are not finite. This is why you see drummers like Buddy Rich, Joe Morello, you know, Joe. I used to go see Joe Jones at the West End when Joe Jones was in his 70s, or, you know, and he still sounded incredible brushes and you know, I mean, those guys were amazing. And Elvin and Roy Haynes, God bless him, he's 91 years old. He can still play. Do you think Roy Haynes would be able to play if he played like this? No. So all these old guys you see playing, that's why they can play, because they play relaxed and they're not wearing out their arms. And plus, if you play like that, you can play with dynamics. Most guys who play like stiff, they got two dynamics, loud and louder. That's it. But if you ever want to play with a jazz trio or softly or play with brushes or play with an orchestra, you've got to learn to play very, very soft and have a really nice touch. So no, I disagree with you on that tightness hard thing.
Okay, this was not my opinion. It was just that I passed on. I agree totally with you.
Oh, okay, good.
All right. Do you have a practice routine? Do you work out your rudiments and solos on a daily basis? What does it take to maintain your level of mastery?
Well, thanks for that. I appreciate that. I still practice about 4 hours a day.
4 hours, okay.
No matter what, that's a priority. When I was a kid, I practiced. Well, I was a practice-aholic, like a workaholic. I was addicted to practicing. So I would probably practice 10 to 12 hours a day.
Did you have any injuries then?
No.
Okay.
No, I've never had any injury. The only time I've had injuries with my hands and arms is I do a lot of woodworking. I make drumsticks, and I've built 2 houses. And then I developed tendonitis because using nail guns and getting up on roofs is really tricky because there's a lot of pressure on your legs and knees, doing any kind of roofing or flooring. So I've had trouble there, but never from playing. So no, I never had any problem. Again, if you play relaxed, you shouldn't have a problem. Now, I'm not saying what I'm trying to say is, Alexander, is that was, like I said, I was a practiceaholic. So like I practiced too much because I was driven. I wanted to be great, you know, and you don't need to practice that much. No one does, because I probably wasted a lot of time just doing unnecessary things, you know. And now I practice 4 hours a day, 2 in the morning, 2 later on. I can't always do that if we have a heavy orchestra week where we're rehearsing in the morning and the night. Maybe I'll do 2 hours a day. But you gotta remember, I'm practicing a lot of instruments. I'm practicing marimba, drum set, timpani, you know, but I'm always working on my hands for at least an hour a day. And I do have a routine. And what I do in the morning, I start with a heavy stick. You know, I make drumsticks. So I made myself, I have a pair of 80-gram sticks. I have a pair of 72-gram sticks. These are the 80-gram sticks. These are 72s. That's leopard wood. That's actually wrong stick. That's
so these sticks are handmade from you, correct?
Yeah. I've been doing that for years. Yeah, all that's on YouTube. But so you know, these are exotic hardwoods, so they're a lot heavier than any kind of maple or hickory. They're much more dense, twice as dense. And then I'll practice with the Wengi sticks. That's just, you know, just doing paradiddles and stuff, and maybe run through some 3 camps, like. And then I'll do the same thing with the lighter stick. And this is like maybe 5 minutes each. And then I'll go to a pair of, these are zebra wood. I'll go to a pair of these. And then I'll be warmed up. That's my warm up. I used to do a whole bunch of, but for me, for number one, it got pretty boring doing one hand at a time. After playing for however many years, 50 years or so. And so now when I warm up with music, I'll play some etudes. If I'm writing something, I'll do that. But the trick for me at my age is always to warm up with a heavier stick. And in the winter, I got to say this, I always run my hands under hot water. To loosen them up. That's when injury happens. You know, when you're tight and you just start playing really fast and loud, and that's when you hurt yourself. You got to gradually get into it. And then, you know, I might do some stretches and all that stuff. But doing the heavier stick thing at first. But remember, it's not a thick stick. All these sticks are the same thickness. That's the trick. So you don't want to play with like a drum corps stick, which is probably like 7/8. These are all 5/8. So because what happens is it messes up your fulcrum, your grip. So you're going from that to that. What I do is I use a heavier stick that's always the same diameter.
Very interesting.
Even my drum set stick that Vic Firth makes for me. Let me grab one of those. So they started making this for me probably 30 some years ago, probably more. Actually more than that, but that's a Vic Firth stick, and this is just about 5/8 too. So my point is I keep everything the same thickness. I think a mistake a lot of drummers make is they use these tiny little sticks, really thin, and then they lose all their control with them. And you know what I mean? And so my thing is I always use the same diameter stick, but different woods. And that's how I do it. So that's how I warm up. And I have a routine that I do. And then I'm always working on a new piece or someone else's music. I have hundreds of books. So if something comes out, I get it right away. And I learn the whole book, or I'll record the whole book. Like for my students, I always record videos for them, and sometimes I
Okay.
post them on YouTube. That's why there's so many videos on there, because I'm always recording stuff for students.
Right.
So I'll just put it up there. But yeah, I think it's important to spend a lot of time warming up every day, at least a quarter of your practice time, kind of ramping up into, and then an hour of productive. Now I got to say, I don't cool down or any of that stuff I've heard. I never understood that. It's not like a brass player where your lips, or you got to be like a trumpet player blowing long tones like for a half hour after the gig. Once I'm done, I'm done. I don't sit there, and I don't understand that. So some drummers talk about it, but yeah.
As far as I can understand, drum corps and parade bands are very popular in the States, mainly because of football and sports. Some believe that there are too many visuals and stick tricks, and not so much traditional rudimental playing. What is your input on this?
I love drum corps. I think it's an incredible art form. Marching band, I think marching band is good. It's good for students. It gets them interested in music. I think that the level can vary from really awful to amazing. Some of these college bands are incredible. And I've taught, obviously, we have a marching band at the college. I've taught hundreds and hundreds of drum corps and marching band students over the years that I've been teaching. Some of them can make the difference can do the difference between that form of drumming, the tightness and the looseness. Some of them can. Others, you got to kind of, break the concrete with a jackhammer. Yeah. But as far as in the States, you're absolutely correct. It is a form of almost a sport. I marched drum corps when I was a kid for 2 years, from when I was, I believe, 10 to 12 or 13, maybe 3 years. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. It was a really good corps. We went to DCI, and I had a great instructor named Walter Kelly, who was legendary, just amazing. And back then, everybody played traditional, and it wasn't like it is now. It was a little more loose, and we didn't. This was back in the 70s, so the 1970s. So the snares were different. The heads weren't bulletproof material. It was different. But I got to tell you, when I see drum corps perform, my jaw drops. It is amazing. Yeah. And all the stick stuff, I love it. I mean, I just love to watch it. As far as making a living doing it, of course, once you age out, it's all over. And you don't get paid to be in drum corps. You got to pay to be in drum corps. So, yeah, there's membership fees that are incredibly high for these drum. Like, I didn't have to pay much because it's back in the 70s. But now you got to pay thousands of dollars to be in a drum corps. So these kids are doing it, but there's a lot of camaraderie. Those are relationships you make that you have your whole life. I still keep in touch with some of my drum corps friends that I knew when I was a little kid, a few of them. And all the stick twirling stuff, I used to do it. I don't do it anymore. It's like the circus, but I think it's amazing, and the level it's come, the evolution of it from when I did it to where it is now it's a different world. I'm a little concerned now with this pandemic, what's going to happen to all this, because a lot of these kids, they live for that. So and if you've ever watched DCI, it's truly an art form, and I don't think it messes up your playing necessarily, but at some point you've got to learn to play differently if you're going to play for a living and play all these other instruments. And there's lots and lots of people who march drum corps who end up being really good orchestral percussionists because they learn the discipline of practicing. When you're in a drum corps, you practice 8 hours a day.
8 hours, huh?
In a parking lot or in a VFW hall, inside or outside in a parking lot, in the sun. So you learn discipline, and that's something that you can't unlearn, and that you carry that with you your whole life. So and same thing with marching band. I think it's terrific for that. So yes, some people look down on it. I do not. I like it.
Okay, so you mentioned DCI, which is the Drum Corps International. There are many drum corps competitions and championships in the US and around the world. Do you think that the art of music and percussion can be truly competitive?
Well, it is competitive by nature. We're always competing for gigs. One thing I tell my students, my performance majors, is, hey, when you get out of here, you're competing against me. So your goal while you're in school is to be as good or better than me, because I'm your competition. I freelance. That's, more than half my income comes from freelancing, from gigging and playing all over the place. And the other part comes from teaching and whatever, studio work and all this other stuff. So it is competitive by nature. So it's good for them to learn that, the competition. I think competition is terrific for students because it builds a drive. And when I was a kid, I was driven to be the best. Like when I tried out for All-State Band, if I didn't win it, I would cry for a week. I'd have tantrums. And that's, well, I was a fanatic, And then once you grow up, you realize, well, that was stupid. But that's part of being great, is wanting to be and wanting to compete. So really, if you play for a living, I got to tell you, Alexander, it's always competitive. You're always competing. Now, when you're my age, I'm in a good place because, I've earned enough respect and gigs and all this that I'm good, But for a long time, like when I lived in New York, it was all about competing for gigs and getting the gig. And, when I was playing on Broadway show stuff and subbing and, there's a whole list of people and you gotta get on that list and you gotta compete and be good and better than anybody. Yeah. So yeah, I think I think drumming or any musical endeavor, I don't think it's good, but it's part of the process.
Okay.
Of being a professional musician. Now, as far as being an amateur musician, no, it doesn't matter because you're not playing for a living, right? But if you play for a living, it is very competitive. Yeah.
Okay. How did the COVID pandemic crisis affect your professional life?
Well, right now, it's horrible because all my work is gone. Luckily, I teach, so I'm teaching a lot of Skype lessons. I mean, I cut my rate in half. It was 120, now it's 60. And so I got a lot of students from all over the world, which is really fun for me because I love talking to, you're in Greece, and I have students in Spain, and Italy, and Portugal, and New Zealand, and the UK, and Brazil, and all over the world. And China, one of those just got cut off. It's a little scary. And Japan. Yeah. So I get to, talk to a lot of people. And luckily, English you speak very well.
Thank you.
Is very, international at this point. So, and so we all kind of don't have a language problem. So I'm loving that. That's fantastic. But other than that, the orchestra I play with, basically the summer season that I've done.
Everything is canceled, correct?
Oh yeah, and we play for 10,000 people at every time we play, which is amazing. To look out there, I see people out there, and then the rest of the season's canceled. I don't know what's going to happen in the fall. All the jazz gigs that I normally do have been canceled, like all the clubs, and I love those. I mean, a lot of the studio sessions I had booked, because I own a recording studio, those were canceled, but now we're talking about, ways to bring those back somehow. Of course, you can't sing with a mask on,
Yeah.
But instrumental stuff is possible. I wish in the States it's a disaster, as you know,
I know,
politically, and there's all kinds of, there's just all kinds of misinformation, and nobody knows what's going on. So, the testing is really bad. No matter what you hear from anybody, there's not enough testing. There's no testing here, basically, where I am. and there's no antibody test yet, so no one could tell who had it or who. So, you know, if we knew that, and then I'm high risk. My mother passed away from it up in New York. 2 weeks ago, yes.
Oh,
and she
I'm
was
sorry.
fine, and then 3 days later, she wasn't. That was it. So, you know, I mean, this is real, and people have to understand that, you know, if you're going out, like now we're having protests in the United States of these dumbasses going out, and I understand they have to work, and I have to work too, you know, but the problem is they're probably not going to die. It's people like my mom and, you know, and other folks who are in their 60s, you know, and there's lots of music. Ellis Marcellus, who I've worked with several times as an engineer with Branford, with his son, who is just an incredible musician. He passed from it in New Orleans. The bass player from Fountains of Wayne, he just died from it. He was younger than I was. He was 54 or something. I mean, there's people are dropping, like Bucky Pizzarelli, Bucky Pizzarelli, the great guitar player, he passed. I mean, there's lots of folks. I'm leaving out lots and lots of folks. John Prine died, one of my favorite songwriters. He was in his 70s, you know. So, you know, it's impacting the musical industry. Not only nobody's working, but people are dying. So it's just a horrible time. But as far as me personally, I'm just trying to keep positive. I'm making lots of videos for YouTube. I'm making a lot of drumsticks. I'm teaching a lot. I'm doing a lot of interviews. I've done probably maybe 5 or 6 interviews this month, you know, this month. So, you know, just trying to keep busy. And my wife's a professional musician as well. And she lost all her work. And for the university, you know, I'm just teaching on Skype. But I have a feeling that we're probably all going to get furloughed from that. And because, you know, how long can you do that? So
yeah, I know.
But on a positive note, I think that people need music, and I think that it's an essential part of life. And what's going to probably happen is we're going to go through maybe a year before any kind of mass performance can take place. You know, our concert hall holds like almost 3,000 people, and there's no way 3,000 people are going to get together, or, you know, there won't be sporting events and all the marching band, like you say, all the drum corps, that stuff will not be happening as far as I know. So there'll be a couple years of just kind of nothing. And then slowly it'll come back, and they'll get a vaccine, and it'll be back. Don't worry. Definitely.
All right. So given the fact that eventually we will get through this pandemic crisis in the near future, are you planning on visiting Greece at some point? We're really looking forward to a workshop or a masterclass here in our country.
Yeah, that's great. You know, I was scheduled to go to the UK in May. My daughter is there, finishing up college. And now she's stuck there because she couldn't get back, so she's in Brighton. And I was just there. I was in Europe last year working with the National Youth Orchestra. I wrote a piece that they performed. They're the fantastic orchestra, 160 people. They had 13 percussionists, and it was a great experience. So I was going to go back, and this time I wanted to go to New Zealand and Greece and Spain, and I have friends in Switzerland who've been there. I wanted to do the whole thing. So yeah, once this thing passes, I'm going to do a European European thing. So I'll let you know when I'm over there. We can get together and have a beer.
Of course, yes. Okay, Rick, I want to thank you very, very much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure our viewers will too. I wish you well, stay safe, and hope to see you soon in Greece.
Great, thanks so much, and thanks for doing this, Alexander. It's a great public service, and there should be more of these things. All right?
Rick, it's been an honor.
All right, stay safe.
You too. Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.